I'm Frederick. They told me this in a whisper. Now, you'll hear it. Enjoy watching. Aaliyah woke up early. Too early. Before the city had finally come out of its sleep. And while the sun was just beginning to break through the murky window glass, covered with traces of night condensation, she slowly rose from the bed, as if weighing every movement because her stomach no longer allowed her to be the same. Light, fast, confident. Another life was living in her body now, and every step was like a vow of safety. Careful, full of internal tension, as if everything that could happen had to happen today and with her. The morning was quiet, dull. Even the birds did not sing as usual, and everything around seemed strangely suspended, like a stage before the beginning of a tragedy. Aaliyah dressed slowly, thoughtfully, choosing a long dark blue skirt and a warm sweater in which she felt protected, not because it warmed her body, but because it hid traces of fatigue, traces of vulnerability, hid her swollen breasts, the lines of her tense shoulders, the tension that she could no longer contain. After all, each of her days began and ended with a fight with how they looked at her, how they spoke to her, how they measured her with their eyes, as if testing her strength. She put her documents in her bag, insurance, a certificate of her due date, even an old envelope with tests, although she did not know why, just like that, just in case, like armor that she carries with her, not for every day, but for every day. She closed the door behind her, and her hand lingered on the lock longer than usual, as if something inside her was telling her, "Take your time." But she did not listen. It was cool outside, but not cold. The air was fresh but chilly, and the asphalt, stained with old puddles, reflected the pale sky and bare trees like a mirror, showing how fragile the world is if you look at it not with your eyes, but with your feelings. She walked slowly but surely, holding onto the handrails of the stairs as she went down, and then, when she came out onto the street, she seemed to dissolve into the rhythm of the city, which had not yet picked up its usual speed. People hurried past with headphones, with coffee, with phones, but no one looked, no one noticed her, or pretended not to notice, and there was something special about it, something familiar, almost reassuring. If you are not seen, you will not be touched. The store she was heading for was an ordinary supermarket, big, bright, with green signs and automatic doors that always opened too abruptly, like a mouth that swallowed people without asking who they were, why they came, or what kind of eyes they would leave with. She went there without fear, with a simple goal, to buy some groceries, yogurt, fruit, bread, something light that would help her get through this day, a day that was supposed to be unremarkable, a day she wanted to live without outbursts. But inside, there was tension. Not because she was waiting for something, but because she already knew everything. She knew how stores often become places where there are no purchases, but confrontations, where you are not just a person, but an object of glances, judgment, suspicion, where your skin is a signal, where your belly is an excuse, where your clothes are an argument. As she entered, she instinctively reached for her hood, but then stopped herself. There is nothing to hide. She stood up straight, calm, showing no fatigue, no pain, no fear. She was ready for anything, but inside, she wanted one thing, just to walk down the aisles, choose what she needed, pay and leave. Just to be human, not a target, not an example, not a mistake, just a human. She walked between the shelves, stopping at the yogurts, comparing dates, keeping an eye on the prices, feeling how people sometimes glanced at her, but then immediately looked away. It was not hostile, it was familiar. She was used to being in the background, and it was safe until she reached the checkout, until she met the gaze of the woman standing behind the conveyor belt, white-skinned, with manicured nails, in the standard store uniform, with an expression on her face that turned cold too quickly. In that moment, everything changed. Aaliyah did not yet know how, but she already felt. This day would not be ordinary. It had started like any other, but it would end differently. Everything in her body tensed. Her stomach felt like stone, and everything that was inside, life, anxiety, hope, froze. She had not yet heard the words, but they were already in the air. And every second now seemed like a step towards something that could not be stopped. The supermarket greeted Aaliyah with a blinding light and a soulless smell of cleaning products, a mixture of bleach and cheap antiseptic that ate into her nose and made the air somehow artificial, lifeless, as if everything around her was not a place where people buy food, but a display case, an exhibition of correctness, sterility, order, into which she did not fit from the very first steps. The floor shone, as if it had just been licked, not washed, but licked to a shine, to a mirror reflection, where her figure seemed alien, distorted. The rows of goods stood perfectly straight, like soldiers in formation. Bananas lay in the correct geometry, boxes of cereal, in a perfect row, and all this looked down at her, mockingly. You are not from here. In this light, her skin seemed even darker. The contrast cut the eye, like a scream in the middle of a library. She noticed her right away. The woman behind the cash register, about 40 years old, in a light-coloured store uniform, with a badge on which the name was written in a florid and too childish way for her icy expression. Her hair was dyed beige blonde, the roots dark but unkempt, as if she didn't dye it. She bleached it, as if she wanted to erase not only the hair colour, but also her age, her tired face, her boring life. But her eyes were alive, tenacious, thin as a blade, and the moment Aaliyah walked in, the woman looked at her, silently, wordlessly. But it wasn't just a look, it was a scan, a diagnosis, a verdict. There was no surprise in her face. There was disgust, neatly hidden under a mask of politeness, like a predator hiding its fangs. She looked at her stomach, rounded under a thin sweater, then at her face, then at her stomach again. Then she looked down at her feet, then at her hair, and Aaliyah realized she had already made up her mind. She hadn't said a word yet, but the decision had been made. She shouldn't be here, not because she had done anything wrong, not because the rules had been broken, but because her skin color, her gait, her eyes, her existence were too loud for this silent, licked space. Aaliyah felt a familiar feeling rise up inside her, heavy, like rust, like sediment. Not fear, not anger, shame. The same shame that isn't yours, the shame that's thrown at you. Shame for standing, for breathing, for seeing how people look at you. She looked down at the basket, which contained only the necessary things: fruit, yogurt, frozen vegetables. Everything was simple. Everything was minimal. She didn't take anything expensive. She didn't take anything extra. And yet, it was enough for her to be judged. When she joined the line, the woman at the cash register pretended not to see her. She served a man in a suit, quickly, without unnecessary words, with a slight smile. Then a woman with a child. She did not even notice that the cashier did not look at her. Then an elderly customer came up. She exchanged a few words with him about the weather. When it was Aaliyah's turn, everything changed. The woman leaned over sharply, picked up a sign that said, "Cashier is not working," and put it in front of herself, without even looking her in the eye. Aaliyah froze. "Excuse me, are you closing?" she asked quietly. The cashier continued not to look. Then she slowly raised her head and answered, "Do you have a service dog?" The question dropped like a stone. Aaliyah did not even immediately understand what was being discussed. Then she guessed. She saw a leash sticking out of her pocket. Small, rolled up, a spare. Her dog was at home. She left it. "No, I don't have anyone with me," she said, feeling her voice break. "We just had complaints. People with animals. Not everyone thinks that's acceptable," the cashier said, again not looking. The line had already moved to the next checkout. Someone glanced, someone bit their lip, someone smirked. Aaliyah felt everyone's attention focused on her again. The cashier opened the checkout, continuing to stand there as if Aaliyah didn't exist. "You can go to the other one," she said. "I was standing here. I'm not feeling well. I'm 9 months pregnant." Her voice broke, trembling. "The rules are the same for everyone," the woman snapped. And that voice had it all: superiority, fatigue, disgust, cruelty, as if her pregnancy was a whim, as if her colour was a provocation, as if her request was a challenge, and she felt her hands clench into fists. Everything inside her wanted to scream, but she stood there, silent, because she knew that one extra movement, one word, one tremor in her voice, and she would become aggressive, loud, difficult. Aaliyah took a step back, then another. Her heart was pounding in her temples. She felt her body constricting with pain, not the physical kind of pain, the pain that was deeper, the feeling of being crossed out again, for no reason, without explanation, just because you were the wrong one, in the wrong place, in the wrong body, in the wrong skin. And all she heard behind her as she walked away was a short hiss from the cashier. Always those ones with complaints. Someone always owes them. Aaliyah didn't turn around, didn't stop. She just walked, silently. There were no more words inside, only a pulse, only the steps to the door, only the knowledge. This day had begun quietly, but it would never be like this again. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have you ever experienced similar situations in your life related to humiliation, prejudice, or racism? It is very important for us to know that you are with us. Each of you is important to us. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the continuation. And now, we continue. She hardly noticed how she found herself in front of the checkout again, still holding the basket, with a barely audible internal ringing of blood in her ears, as if after a slap that no one had given openly, but which had already left a mark. Everything inside her seemed to have shrunk to a point. Her stomach was like stone, her breathing was uneven, but her face was calm, like a mask pulled tight by an effort of will, because if she gave in, if she allowed her voice to break, then all this would be used against her as always. She knew it. It was written somewhere in her genetic memory, on the edge of instinct. Be silent, smile, do not snap back, otherwise you will become dangerous. You can't do it with your bag, the cashier said, without looking up, as if she were talking not to a person, but to a machine gun. Her voice was cold, even, trained. For a moment, Aaliyah did not understand what she was talking about. She looked down at her bag, an ordinary fabric bag, soft, not bulky, with nothing suspicious in it. Why not? She asked, almost in a whisper, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't want to attract attention. But attention was already on her. The line behind her had died down. People weren't turning away. They were just frozen, waiting, watching the scene unfold. The regulations prohibit bringing personal bags to the checkout. They must be left in the lockers at the entrance. Do you have something there? Now her voice was more tenacious, with an intonation that sounded like a hint, a suspicion, a predetermined conclusion. Aaliyah froze. Something inside her was jammed. She kept documents, insurance, money, keys in this bag. Leaving them meant trusting a place that was already making it clear. You are not welcome here. She wanted to say something, but the cashier was not waiting. And do you have an animal with you? See the sign? Animals are not allowed. It's against the rules. Aaliyah blinked. Several times. She thought she had misheard, but no. The woman pointed to the end of the leash sticking out of her inside pocket. Not the dog, not the sounds. The leash, the spare one, the empty one, without the dog. I don't have an animal with me, Aaliyah said clearly, calmly, but with a hint of steel in her voice. It's just a leash. I didn't take it out by accident. The dog is at home. We can't check. And anyway, you've already violated 2 points. The bag. And this. Should I call a supervisor? The woman didn't raise her voice, but her words were like blows. Not loud, but precise. Someone nearby coughed. Someone stepped aside. One of the men behind her said quietly, but clearly enough. Here it goes again. It's always the same with them. Aaliyah heard it, and she didn't react. She knew. If she turned around, she would lose. If you say it, you lose. If you show pain, they get what they want. I just want to pay for my groceries, she said, placing her basket on the conveyor belt. This is not a pass store. I have a right to be here. You will not get through this checkout. The cashier looked up now, and there was something new in her gaze. Contempt, confidence, entitlement. She stood like a judge, and had already pronounced her sentence. "I will not get through to you." 3 words, clear, calm, without shouting, but they had more power than laws. The line was silent. One man, already putting his items in his basket, glanced at Aliyah and simply walked to another checkout, as if she were contagious. A woman with a child shifted from foot to foot and looked away. One teenager took out his phone. He started filming. Aliyah felt it, not saw it, but sensed how she was being turned into a spectacle. She stood alone in the center of the sterile white store, lit up like a spotlight, and she knew this wasn't just a stage. This was a trial in which she was the defendant. Not for a crime, for her presence, for daring to be here, to be pregnant, to be carrying a bag, to be on a leash, to have a face that couldn't be hidden. "Are you refusing to serve me?" she asked, louder now, not because she wanted to scream, but because her voice couldn't be any quieter. "I won't peek at you," the cashier repeated, and now she said it so that everyone could hear, as a defense, as a provocation. "You can go to the next checkout or leave the store." "Why?" Aliyah's voice shook. "Because you have personal belongings, because you're breaking the rules, because you're inconveniencing other customers." And now the cashier's voice was louder. The words flew like bullets. "You're creating tension." It wasn't just an excuse, it was a label, an accusation. "You're creating tension." It meant you're superfluous, you're an outsider, you're not wanted. She stood there. Her stomach ached. Everything inside her was screaming. But outside, there was silence. The store was still alive. The scanners were beeping. The baskets were rolling. People were buying groceries. And in the center stood a pregnant black woman who they didn't want to serve. Not for her violation, for her presence, for the fact that her face didn't fit the decor. And no one said, "That's wrong." No one said, "She's pregnant." No one said, "Leave her alone." The line moved on. The world moved on. Aliyah picked up her basket, slowly, wordlessly. She turned. She took a step. 1, 2, and left, with the feeling that she hadn't just been kicked out. She hadn't just been humiliated. She had been put in her place, a place that had been prepared for her in advance, at the checkout, in line, in life. And no one moved, because everyone knew this place is not for her. Aliyah took a step away from the checkout, but it was as if she hadn't moved from the spot. She was surrounded by a dense, invisible wall of looks, silence, and breath that froze around her, as if the entire supermarket had suddenly become a living body, and this body was rejecting her as something alien. The people around her, as if on command, turned away, but not out of indifference, but from a deliberate distancing, as if from something dirty, from something that shouldn't be nearby. The woman with the child adjusted the boy's hood and led him away, glancing briefly at Aliyah, not condemning, not angry, but full of fatigue and quiet irritation, as if she was saying with that look, "Again, with your complaints. We just want to buy groceries." The man in the suit with a plastic bag in his hand rolled his eyes and turned to another row, demonstratively expressing boredom, not even bothering to hide his grin. Aliyah stood with her hands pressed to her stomach and felt it reacting. A hardness, a heaviness, a tugging sensation inside, as if something was wrong, as if a child could feel everything that was happening, as if a small heart inside her was beating, in unison with her humiliation. She tried to take a deep breath, but the air caught in her throat because she felt hot, not from the temperature, but from an internal fire, from an anger that could not be expressed. But to let it out would be to lose, because in this space, she already had a place of trouble, a place of discomfort, a place of being looked upon with condescension and fear. She walked slowly to the other checkout line, where a young man sat with an earphone in his ear. He glanced at her, then at the basket, then at her stomach, and said quickly, "The line is behind you, ma'am." There was no line. No one was standing behind her, but he had already moved his hands away from the scanner, as if he had a premonition. It would be difficult with her. There would be a conflict with her, and he didn't want that. He wanted silence, calm, white faces, short conversations. Not this, with eyes full of pain, with fingers clutching the handle of the basket like a life preserver. "I just want to pay," Alia said, trying to speak calmly. Her voice betrayed him, became hoarse, as if her throat was being squeezed from the inside, as if her body itself was resisting the words. The guy shrugged. "Call the boss. I have instructions. I can't do anything." And he turned away, as if she wasn't there. As if there wasn't a woman standing next to her, who was in pain, scared, and struggling. As if her existence was an obstacle. At that moment, someone whispered from behind, a woman's voice, loud, not embarrassed. "Let her go already. What is she doing here?" Another voice. "That's why all the attention comes from people like that. Always unhappy, always causing problems." Alia stood, and she felt her legs starting to buckle. She grabbed the edge of the counter to keep her balance. Her head was spinning. The world was shrinking. Her ears were ringing. She felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she wouldn't let them come, because those tears would be proof. For them, proof that they were right, that she was weak, that she was confrontational, that she was unwanted. Her breathing quickened. Her fingers turned white from the effort. She tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. "Are you okay?" a voice suddenly said. Not a caring one, not a kind one, but the one on duty, the security guard, a man of about 50 with a paunch, a heavy gait, a face full of fatigue and irritation. He didn't come closer. He stood at a distance as if afraid that she would explode. "I just need to buy this," she whispered, but even she did not recognize herself. He paused and said, "You are creating a fuss. You are scaring the customers. Calm down, or I will ask you to leave." His voice was monotonous, but there was a hint in it. "You are already on the edge. One more step, and we will throw you out of here." Alia looked into his face and saw emptiness in his eyes. Not hatred, not anger, just complete indifference. For him, she was neither a woman, nor a pregnant woman, nor a client. She was a problem that needed to be solved, seamlessly, quickly, preferably silently. "Leave," he said. "This is not the place for a scene." A scene. He called it a scene. Her silence, her breathing, her tears that she held back. Everything was a stage, a show, and she understood. There was not even space for her pain here. Her pain is a show. Her humiliation is an irritant. Her child is a burden that prevents others from buying bread and chicken breasts. She stood. She stared into space. And in that moment, time stood still. All sounds became muffled. All faces blurred. Everything disappeared. Except for one thing. She was here. And she was alone. Alone in a white room full of products, surveillance cameras, cash registers, customers, and the smell of cleaning products. Alone with pain, with despair, with a burden inside. Alone with skin that made her visible and yet invisible at the same time. Her body seemed alien to her. Her thoughts were disintegrating. She felt everything screaming inside. But outside, there was silence. The people around her began to move again. Someone passed by, brushing their shoulder. Someone laughed. Someone called out to the child. And everything became normal. Normal for them, and impossible for her. She picked up the basket, slowly, put it on the floor, turned around, and she left, step by step, without a sound, without a look, without words. And behind her, the white hall filled with life again, as if it had never been there, as if she were an error in the system, noise, garbage, a fixed bug, and only her heart was still beating, still screaming, still pounding, as proof. She was. She is. She saw. She remembers. He didn't show up right away. They called him like a ghost, like the last resort, as if there were no arguments or hope left after him. Young, with perfectly styled hair, in a black shirt with a badge on which his name and position were written in white letters. Administrator. He walked quickly, like a man tired of customers, of questions, of shifts, of other people's emotions. His face expressed nothing but businesslike fatigue, as if he analyzed the same situations 100 times a day, where the one complaining was always to blame. He didn't even approach Aaliyah right away. First, he exchanged glances with the cashier, received half words from her, a nod, as if that was enough to pass a verdict. Only then did he turn to her. Aaliyah stood straight, holding her stomach, which ached not from tension, but from the fact that her body remembered everything, every word, every look, every movement of this white hall, where she was anything but a person. The manager looked at her the way you would look at someone who was creating unnecessary work. "Ma'am, good afternoon," he began with false politeness, in a voice that had no life in it. "We have received information that you are violating the store's internal rules." "I just wanted to pay," she said, her voice dry, compressed but firm. "I was standing in line. I was not served." According to information from an employee, he nodded toward the cashier, who was demonstratively busy scanning the next customer's merchandise, as if none of this concerned her. "You have a questionable item with you, and possibly a service animal. This is a violation of the rules." Aaliyah looked at him point blank. "I do not have an animal with me," she said clearly. "It's a leash. It's empty. The dog is at home. I'm pregnant. I was standing quietly. They simply refused to serve me." The manager sighed like someone who finds all this unbearably boring. "We cannot know for sure. You did not present any documentation confirming that the leash is not part of the escort. Do you have a certificate?" "A document? A paper?" She was confused. "For what? For not having a dog?" Her voice wavered. "For not having a dog with me?" He shrugged. "A special permit is required to have a service animal, and if you don't have one, it is considered a violation. Also, your bag was not left at the entrance. This also goes against store policy." "I have personal items in my bag, documents, money. I am not obliged to leave it in an open locker." "These are our rules." His voice was colder than steel. "They are general, and we cannot make exceptions. Otherwise, it will be considered discrimination against other customers." Aaliyah felt her knees buckle. He said the word discrimination and used it against her, against the one who had just been thrown out of the line, against the one who was looked at like dirt, against the one who was refused service because she was not the same, not from their world, not in their skin. She wanted to scream, but she knew that would be the beginning of the end. "Are you asking me to leave?" she asked slowly. He nodded. "We cannot continue to serve you under these conditions. You may return if you follow the rules." He said it as if she had come barefoot, in dirty clothes, with a husky on a leash and screams in her voice, not with a basket, half empty, with a straight back, with a stamp of fear and learned patience on her face. "So you are kicking me out?" she repeated. He sighed. "We are asking you to leave the premises, politely, until security arrives." He did not threaten. He did not even look at her with hostility. He looked at her like a task that needed to be cleaned up, like a stain on the white tiles, like a statistic, like an item in a report. There was nothing in his eyes, and that was what was most frightening, because he wasn't a monster. He wasn't a villain. He was a system, a pure, cold, soulless system that had no place for a person unless they fit the parameters. Aaliyah didn't remember leaving. Her legs carried her. Her fingers clutched the edge of her bag, everything in it shaking, even her documents, even her plastic card, as if they knew they wouldn't be accepted. No one stopped her. No one came out. No one said, "Maybe you need help." She felt her gaze swimming, her ears ringing, her breathing becoming ragged. She stood at the exit and saw how people continued to live behind the glass, eating ice cream, chatting on the phone, kissing children, laughing. And she, exiled, unwanted, non-existent, just stood there, and every breath she took was a reminder. You don't belong here. You are not a person. You are an irritant. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Has anything similar ever happened in your life? Moments when you were rejected, humiliated, or ignored for no reason? It is important for us to read your responses because each of you is truly important to us. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the continuation. And if you think such stories are necessary, support with a like. And now, we continue. She was already standing at the exit, not moving, as if her feet had grown into the ground, as if what had happened had not yet had time to take root in her consciousness, had not become reality, only echoed in her temples, and everything in her screamed, "Go away! Just go away!" But her body did not obey, because inside her there was something stronger than resentment, burning, prickly, like a thorn under the skin, that very feeling that does not allow you to resign yourself, does not allow you to turn away, does not allow you to be just a shadow. She stood and did not even know what she was waiting for. Maybe an apology that would never come. Maybe one word, one look that would confirm she had not gone crazy. This really happened. But at that moment, when she had almost turned around, almost taken a step toward the doors, she heard behind her, "They want everything their own way," pregnant, and the most impudent of all. It was said quietly, but deliberately not too quietly. A whisper that was more poisonous than a scream. The cashier's voice, calm, with a note of satisfaction, with the tone that women use when they are confident of the crowd's support. Aaliyah did not turn around immediately. Time seemed to stand still. These words did not just hurt. They cut like a blade through a tendon. There was no direct aggression in them. Only contempt, only sarcasm, only demonstrative superiority. Everything she had tried to endure, everything she had tolerated, all of it turned into a slap in these words. She stood and heard how no one objected. No one said, "This is not possible." No one asked for silence. On the contrary, some slight movement began. Someone burst out laughing, someone chuckled, someone shifted from foot to foot, as if they felt better. She was the problem. She was the source of discomfort. And now she was made to understand who she was. Balanced, returned to its place. Aaliyah turned around, slowly, turning her head as if every muscle resisted, as if even her body understood that there would be no victory behind this turn. Just another wound. Her eyes burned, not from tears, from an internal fire, from the desire to scream, but not to give them that pleasure. She looked at the cashier, who was no longer looking at her, looking at the scanner, smiling at the old woman, handing her the check, as if nothing had happened, as if everything was fine, as if Aaliyah was just trash that had thrown itself out. That smile had everything: victory, height, contempt, confidence in impunity. Aaliyah took a step forward. Her heart beat like a drum. Everything inside was squeezing. The child moved, sharply, noticeably, as if it sensed a storm. She was not just pregnant. She was a pregnant woman who had been made an enemy. For silence, for trying to be polite, for daring to be. "What did you say?" Her voice broke, but she got it out. Not loudly, but loud enough for the whole line to hear. And they did. The supermarket grew quieter. The cashier looked up. "I didn't understand you," she said with icy politeness. Aaliyah took a step closer. "You just said that I want things my way, that I'm impudent. Why?" The woman smiled. "You must have misheard. I was talking to myself." It was said with such mockery, with such subtle mockery, that Aaliyah felt everything inside her turn over. She couldn't breathe. She felt hot, but she stood there. She didn't leave. She looked at the cashier, long and hard, and she couldn't stand the gaze. She looked down, but it was too late. The room knew what was happening. People knew what was happening. Only no one intervened. No one came up. Everyone was a witness, and no one became a defender. "Do you think that if I am silent, I do not understand what is happening?" Aaliyah's voice was firmer than before. "Do you think that if I did not throw a scandal, then it is possible to do this to me? On the shelves, on the regulations, on hints?" No one answered. The silence became thicker. In this silence there was everything: approval, fear, indifference. She stood like a living wound, as a reminder of what no one wants to see. She was a pregnant black woman whom they were trying to squeeze out not physically, morally, socially, systemically, and now, to finish her off, with words, with a whisper, with a smile, to humiliate completely. But she was still standing, still breathing, still watching. "I will not leave just like that," she said. "You can call security, you can call anyone you want, but I am not silent anymore." She did not scream, she did not wave her arms, but her voice was louder than any scream, because it contained something they couldn't stop: the truth. She turned slowly and walked out, not hunched over, not dropping her eyes, but with her body in which every nerve screamed. Near the exit, someone whispered, "Why did she even come?" And that was the last straw. Not because it was rude, but because it was sincere. People really didn't understand why she came, why she opened her mouth, why she stayed, why she resisted. She was a mistake in their smooth world, and they wanted the mistake to go away. And she just wanted to buy groceries. She just wanted to live. And even that was too much. She sat on a bench near the entrance, where the warm concrete from the day was still felt, although the sun had almost disappeared behind the houses, and a cold wind blew through the air, as alien and indifferent as everything that had just happened. In her hands was a plastic bag with the only yogurt that she had bought at the neighboring kiosk, just to have something to hold, just so she wouldn't go empty-handed. Because to go empty-handed after being wrung out like a rag was the ultimate humiliation. Her fingers were shaking, and she tried not to look at the people passing by. No one was looking at her. No one was asking. No looks, no words, no gestures. She had become transparent. The bench creaked under her, and each creak sounded louder than anything she was allowed to say inside. She remembered all the phrases that had been said, remembered the administrator's voice, dry, alien, as if from another world. She remembered the cashier, her face, her grin, her precise words, spoken with cold, polished hatred, in which there was no emotion, no pity, only confidence. Confidence that she could, that she was allowed, that nothing would happen to her for it. Aaliyah did not want to cry. Tears did not come. There was no place for tears in her chest but a black hole. Everything inside seemed to have shrunk into a point, into a lump, dense, sharp, cutting. She felt her stomach tense, how the child moved, restlessly, uncomfortably, as if he too understood that the world was not what awaited him. She stroked her side, as if calming not herself, but him. No one came up. People passed by. The woman with the stroller did not even look. The man in the delivery uniform stepped aside a little, as if she could pass something on to him. Everyone walked, everyone lived, and no one knew that she no longer felt like a part of this city, this street, this air. Suddenly, an elderly woman sat down next to her, without a word, just sat. She smelled of powder and garlic. Aaliyah tensed a little, but did not move. The woman was silent for a minute. Then she said, "I saw everything." Her voice was low, hoarse. Aaliyah turned her head, silent. The woman added, "Not everyone thinks so, but most do. It's easier for them to think that you're lying, that you're using your pregnancy as a weapon, that you didn't come for groceries, but for pity." These words were not consolation. They were the truth, harsh, unwrapped, and Aaliyah didn't know whether they made it easier or more painful. She only nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Nothing more. The woman stood up and left, without saying goodbye, without a glance, just gone, as if her role had been played. Aaliyah stayed, sat until the light had completely left the streets. Then she stood up, slowly, carefully, as if she was afraid that the ground would collapse under her. She walked home silently, as if her legs were carrying her, past the windows, past the doors, past the families who were having dinner, laughing, watching TV, and in each window, another world, where she was not needed, where there was no place for her. She came home, closed the door, leaned her forehead against it, and stood there for a long time, A very long time. The air in the apartment was warm, but not cozy. Her dog ran up, froze at her feet, wagged its tail and whined quietly. She sat down next to it, hugged it, pressed her forehead to her forehead. "You are the only one who is not afraid of me," she said out loud, almost in a whisper. And in that whisper, there was everything. Tiredness, fear, loneliness that could no longer be hidden. She went into the bathroom, looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was grey, her eyes were dull, as if it wasn't she who was standing there, but someone else whose story had ended. But she knew she was still alive. She would breathe, for herself, for the one inside, and for the truth that no one wanted to hear. In the evening, when the store closed, when the rest of the day dissolved in the neon of the signs, the honks of passing cars, and the smell of cheap pastries from the kiosk next door, inside the supermarket employees' service chat, in that very closed space where more is allowed than is customary, where you can make jokes that are not said out loud, one of the employees, an intern, a young guy with a short haircut and a perpetual grin, posted a photo. The picture was taken furtively, through the glass. It was her, Aaliyah, at the moment when she was standing at the exit, with her back to the store, with hunched shoulders, holding a bag in her hands. Alone. He simply signed it. Another queen of the stage, almost threw us a rally in the dairy department. And he added a smiley face laughing until tears. About 30 seconds later, reactions started coming in. Someone liked it. Someone wrote, "She again?" Someone. "What happened to the dogs? Did she have documents?" And again, laughter, reactions, stickers. No one asked unnecessary questions. No one asked how she felt, what happened to her. All of this was just another incident for them, a reason for discussion, for exchanging barbed phrases, behind which there was neither heart nor thought. A person simply turned into content. Pain simply turned into a meme. One of the chat participants, the deputy administrator, forwarded the photo and comment up to the administrator, the same one who politely refused her during the day. He read everything, looked at the photo, chuckled and, without thinking, forwarded it further to the accounting department, accompanied by a short message. "Check if she has any complaints or claims. If there are any, you need to be ready." The accountant, a man of about 40 with a bald head, knew his business well. He opened the database. A routine check. Just a name. Just to compare. He typed Aaliyah, and the system returned several matches. He added Han, and his fingers froze. A list of salaries, a list of bonuses paid. Co-owner by proxy status. Name, Huntington, Aaliyah J. He blinked. Looked again. Checked again. No mistake. He scrolled down. Yes, her name was on the register of beneficiaries, through a foundation, through a trust structure. But it was all official. She was one of the chain's key investors. Her signature was on old documents, 3 years old. Rent statements, supply statements. He went pale. His palms were sweating. He sat up straight. He dialed the general manager's number. "We have a problem," he said by way of greeting. There was silence at first on the other end of the line, then a short, "Speak." "Today's story, with that woman, with the cash register, with the belly." He hesitated. "Her name is on the register. We have her. It's her money." The silence stretched on. "Are you sure?" The voice became lower. "Absolutely. Everything is on paper. I checked it 3 times. If she decides to take it out into the open." He did not finish. Everyone understood what this could lead to. Not just a complaint, not just a scandal, but a trial, resonance, a shadow on the reputation, involvement of the media. Because now this is not just a conflict with a pretentious client. This is an internal catastrophe. The system has rejected its own mistress, its source, its roots, and it did it loudly, publicly, in front of dozens of witnesses, with complete confidence that it has the right to do so. The manager hung up and called a meeting, as an emergency. In the evening, after closing, the conference room smelled of coffee and fear. The cashier arrived later than everyone else, with chewing gum in her cheek. She did not know what was going on. She walked in confidently, sat down, saw faces, froze. The manager stood up, said, "Do you know who was in the store today?" She shrugged. "Another one who thinks everyone owes her. I was just following the rules." He threw a paper on the table. "This is who it is. This is who she is." The woman read it and froze. Her face turned white. The chewing gum got stuck behind her teeth. She opened her mouth, but found no words. The manager continued, "You didn't just refuse a client. You insulted a network partner, openly, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras, with comments in the chat." No one said a word. The atmosphere thickened. Everyone understood. This was more than a mistake. This was a diagnosis. The entire system, the entire culture of internal communication, everything that was considered the norm, was now poison. A cancer that suddenly spoke, and it had a name, Aaliyah Huntington, the woman whose face was a target today, and whose name was on the documents that ensured the operation of this entire structure. The manager looked at everyone and said quietly, "You thought she was just..." And he didn't finish. But everyone understood, because that's how they saw her, just as they saw her. As just pregnant, as just problematic, as just black, as just a voice in the crowd. And she turned out to be the one without whom this crowd could not exist. The silence lasted a long time. Then he said, "We have to decide how to fix this, because if she decides to talk, no one will save us." And in that silence there was recognition. Late, bitter, hopeless, but still not sincere. Because no one said, "We were wrong." They said, "She's important," not, "She's a person." And that was their biggest mistake. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments what city or country you are from, and whether something similar has ever happened in your life. Moments when you were judged not by your deeds, but by your appearance or status. It is important for us to read your stories, because each of you is truly important to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the continuation. And now, we continue. The morning passed, but the tension did not go away. The supermarket staff were still reeling from the incident of the previous day, and the room where the managers had gathered was filled with a silence so thick and heavy that it could be felt. They sat at a round table, and all eyes were on the manager, who was clearly nervous. His hands were fiddling nervously with the edge of a file, and his gaze seemed to wander, unable to find a point of support. Everyone understood. This was not just a mistake. This was a failure, a huge one. Long before the accountant entered the room, the messages had already started coming in. The security director called back. He had one question. "Are you sure you understand who we are dealing with?" It sounded almost like a threat, but it was clear to everyone that this threat did not come from the outside, but from the system itself, from the very charter of the store, which was now in danger of being destroyed. The accountant, a middle-aged man with a taut face and a closed look, opened the door and entered, quietly, without raising his head. His face wasn't just pale, it was scared, as if he'd seen a ghost. He sat down at the table without saying a word and began to spread out papers in front of him, directing his gaze at each person present. The manager sitting next to him looked at him, waiting for an explanation. "Aaliyah Huntington," the accountant said, trying hard to hide the worry in his voice. He looked up and looked at everyone in the room. "This isn't just a client." The words hung in the air like heavy weights. Everyone was silent. The accountant continued, "She didn't just go and demand the truth. She owns the chain, not directly but through a trust, through an investment fund. But her signature is on the salaries, on the leases, on the supply documents." That moment was what caused the complete stupefaction. The manager sat with his mouth open, not knowing what to say. He couldn't understand it. How could the woman he'd just thrown out have anything to do with this? Their business. Everything was spinning in his head, and the only thing that was clear was that yesterday's firing was not just under investigation. It was now calling into question his entire career, his place in this company. He opened his mouth to say something, but the accountant continued. "She signed the leases for all our stores. She is one of the main investors, and her name is on the key contracts that keep the business going. She signs the salaries of all the employees. The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The cashier in the corner suddenly felt her body become heavy, as if the walls were closing in on her. She tried to understand what was happening, but it was all too much for her. She couldn't believe that the woman she had fired for a simple rule violation was connected to such a big business. She sat silently, shrinking in her chair, unsure of what to do, until the store manager turned to her with a cold gaze. "Do you understand what we just did?" he asked. His voice was low, calm, but there was a threat in it. The cashier didn't answer right away. She didn't understand. She just couldn't understand. I didn't know." Her voice was trembling, but she held back, although her heart was pounding in her chest. "Didn't you even think about who was standing in front of you?" the director continued. He was worried. It was understandable. He knew that the consequences of their actions now could be catastrophic. "She could destroy us. We lose business. We lose trust. We lose everything," he said, not trying to hide his anger. And it wasn't just an insult. It was an admission that everything they considered the norm was now a mistake for which they would have to pay. Aliyah Huntington, a woman they had not just bumped into, but a person who was not only important to the company, but also one of those who gave them a chance to work. And now, because of the cashier's thoughtless actions, they were on the verge of losing everything. "She's not just a customer," the accountant repeated, looking up, his eyes full of shame. "She's our partner. We need to talk to her, fast, apologize, and maybe offer compensation." But then, as expected, the cashier started making excuses. She couldn't hold back. "I didn't know. I was just following the rules." Her voice was becoming increasingly nervous. She was starting to feel her position at work weakening. But it didn't help. The administrator had already realized that the situation had gotten out of control. He remained silent, not knowing how to save face. The manager sitting next to him opened his mouth. "But she was too aggressive. I couldn't let her through. She looked like a woman who could fix everything." But then everyone fell silent again. The manager turned to the table, his face turning stony. He knew that a simple apology was not enough. He knew that this could cost the company not only its profits, but also its reputation. "We screwed up," he finally said, and there was no anger or disappointment in his voice, only the knowledge that now they would have to suffer not only the guilt, but also the consequences of their stupidity. The next morning, Aliyah walked into the store, but this time she was different. She was not the woman everyone expected to run into. This time, she walked confidently, not with a basket, not with purchases, but in formal clothes, in a business suit that emphasized her figure and her status. No nervousness, no shyness, only a firm intention to do what she had to do. Not just get an answer, but also to restore the justice that had been lost, torn apart by all these unspeakable humiliations. The cashier standing at the checkout did not immediately recognize her. She was not the woman who had puffed herself up in line, not the one whose eyes were full of resentment and fear. This was a different Aliyah. But when she approached the checkout and looked straight into the woman's eyes, the cashier immediately felt that something was wrong. Holding her gaze, she pressed her lips together, but said nothing. She did not know how to react. She didn't know who this woman was now, why she was here. She continued to stand there, fiddling with the receipt, as if she couldn't see who was in front of her, and waited for Aliyah to make the first move. There were two more people standing behind Aliyah, the store manager she had encountered before, and the director of the chain, with the face one usually had when problems needed to be resolved, and the lawyer, silent, with a folder in his hands, as if he had come not to solve the problem, but to record it. The director looked at the cashier and said, "Please serve the customer." The cashier still didn't understand who was in front of her. She looked up, and her face went pale. Aliyah was standing there with an expression that was impossible to miss. The cashier took a step back, and a realization flashed in her eyes. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had ruined something bigger than her job. "You," she began, but didn't finish. She felt her knees weaken. Her voice broke. She tried to justify herself, but she already knew. There would be no justification. All those rules, all those schedules, All those regulations, they now seemed empty. No papers, no instructions could justify what had been done to the woman who stood in front of her. Alia did not answer. She was in no hurry to speak because she understood. She did not need to explain. She did not need confirmation. She had already made up her mind. She was not here to receive an apology or to understand what had happened. She had come for the truth. She had come for her right to respect. Taking a breath, she turned to the manager, but without looking at the cashier. I did not come to buy. I came to make this official. We have a few things that need to be discussed. The manager looked at her and stepped aside. I know what you want to say. We all know what happened. But what do we do about it? Alia looked at him. You could start with an apology, but that is not why I am here. She turned to the director and the lawyer. He was silently holding the folder in his hands, but Alia knew that she had already started working. Papers, signatures, contracts. She was a part of them. With her signature, with her money, everything she had experienced was no longer just a personal grievance. It was a matter that no one could hide. I need to know what you will do with this situation, and if your management does not resolve it properly, I will be forced to take other measures. The cashier clenched her fists. She did not know what to do. She sat like a motionless stone, having already lost the right to justification, to explanation. She understood that her place was in this store, in this system, but now she realized that all that was left for her was to go through the punishment that she had arranged for herself. No one said a word until Alia turned her gaze to the cashier. At that moment, her eyes became cold as ice. She no longer saw her as a woman with a belly, with some kind of special position. She saw her as someone who had lost her humanity the moment she abandoned another person. I don't expect an apology from you. I don't want an excuse, Alia said. I want you to understand. I have not forgiven, and I'm not going to. The silence was as deep as the morning fog. Every word she said hung in the air like a heavy weight. The cashier's brow began to furrow, but she said nothing. The lawyer stood up and opened the folder, as if rereading the rules he might need to reread. But even he knew that no rules would help here. He was trying to find a solution, but he knew that nothing good would come of this meeting. The one who could make it calmer, more peaceful, was already on the verge of disappearing. Alia stepped toward the cash register again, her hands strong, confident. There was no longer the fear in her eyes that had been there on the first day she came in. You're lucky I didn't react right away, she told the cashier. But it's over now. I'll decide what to do next. When she walked out, she was no longer the woman who'd come here for groceries. She was the woman who'd come for her right to be respected, and no one could stop her. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have there been moments in your life when you encountered injustice or racism, as it happens in the stories? It is very important for us to know your opinion. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the continuation, and do not forget to support us with a like. And now, we continue. Alia stood straight, not moving, not allowing herself to waver or retreat. There was no fear in her eyes, only a cold determination, like a person who had already stopped hoping for good, but still had not lost her strength. She looked at everyone, at the cashier, at the manager, at the director, at the lawyer, at all those who were next to her, but at that moment they seemed to her just shadows, empty figures who were not able to see her true essence. The silence in the hall became so dense that you could almost touch it. The entire supermarket held its breath. Everyone watched the person standing in front of them, like a woman who was kicked out yesterday, today put on a pedestal. And not because she achieved victory, but because she was no longer afraid to be herself. Because in her eyes there was now something more than just human vulnerability. It was dignity. It was the awareness of her own strength, and everyone who was nearby felt it. Alia raised her head and said calmly, I was humiliated. I was pushed out. And you forgot that behind every face there can be power. Not power, but human dignity. But you didn't even recognize that. These words were like a heavy stone thrown into the water. It didn't crash. It didn't create a wave, but it was precisely calculated to achieve its goal, lightly, quietly, but with a weight that made everyone in the room stop and think. The cashier looked at the floor. Her hands were shaking, but she continued to pretend that she didn't notice what was happening. The administrator lowered his head, not knowing where to go. He was fed up with this situation, but he knew that he couldn't stop what had started. The director was pale, his shoulders hunched, as if everything that had happened was not his decision. The lawyer standing in the corner looked at Aaliyah, but his gaze was not disdainful. Rather, it was assessing, like a person who was trying to understand what exactly he was supposed to defend. There was no sympathy in his eyes, just a quiet understanding that there would be no easy way out of this. But what was happening was precisely the result of what they had done to her. She was their partner. She was the one who could destroy their business. And now they knew it. There was no more room for excuses. This was not just an event. This was a betrayal. "Did you think I would just walk past?" she continued, without changing her intonation. "Did you think that if you pushed me out, I would just walk away with my eyes downcast? That I would disappear the moment I was no longer useful to you?" She took a step forward, and the cashier instinctively stepped back. The lawyer, noticing her movement, stepped aside, ready to intervene, but froze, seeing that the woman was not aggressive. She was calm. She was confident. And that was the scariest thing of all. "You all assumed that I didn't matter," she said, "because I'm a woman, because I'm black, because I'm pregnant. But you've forgotten that behind every face, behind every body, behind every story, behind every pain, there can be power. Power that doesn't depend on the color of your skin or who you are in the eyes of others." It was said with such clarity, with such force, that no one in the room could find the words to respond. Those looking at her no longer saw a woman who had come to buy groceries. They saw a person. They saw a person who was ready to fight for her dignity. The lawyer looked at the director, and he took a step back. He understood. And in that moment, it was clear. No explanation, no excuses could be enough. It was the moment of truth. "You can't humiliate me," Aaliyah said, looking at the cashier. "You have no right to treat me as nothing. I'm not just a bug in the system. I'm not just a problem customer. I'm a person, and I can't be pushed out like I'm trash." She turned and walked toward the exit. But before she left, she stopped. Her voice was quiet but strong. "None of you understood what I was saying," she said. "I don't demand that you apologize. I don't demand that you understand. But I demand that you understand. I will stand. I will fight. And I will not be silenced." And she left. The supermarket door closed behind her with a soft thud. The silence that remained in the room was the sound of despair, the sound of defeat. The employees stood as if frozen. The cashier stared at the empty space where she had just stood, not knowing what to do, what to say. She didn't realize what had happened. She didn't realize that her words, her actions, were part of something much larger. Someone was being thrown out. And now she realized that she had been thrown out out of her own world, out of her own beliefs, out of her own indifferent reality. A week after the incident at the store, the cashier disappeared. She didn't show up for work. No one knew what happened to her. Some said she was fired, others said she quit of her own accord. But either way, she was gone. Those around her didn't ask questions. For them, it was over, like an incident they'd long forgotten. In the eyes of most, she was simply that woman who had failed her test, who couldn't handle the pressure. The only reminder of her was an empty corner at the checkout and a shadow of what had happened. Meanwhile, the supermarket was closed for a week. The windows were covered with plastic films, the entrance was blocked, and the employees began to redesign the interior. The new look of the store was supposed to reflect the new management. During this period, while all this was happening, no one suspected that behind this quiet transition, there was a real storm. Because in fact, everything changed not in the store. Everything changed for those who thought they were allowed to remain unpunished. And then one night, when the store reopened, a photo appeared on the local news. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't sharp. It was of Aaliyah, a pregnant black woman standing right in front of the store window, looking at the sign that read, "Under new management." No caption, no name. Just the shadow of justice that seemed too late. But for many, it was still clear and tangible, because there were no words in the photo, but there was everything else. Aaliyah looked at the display case with a thoughtful expression. There was no bitterness in her eyes, no anger, not even what they expected from her. Sadness. There was coldness in her eyes. It was a look that was not human at all, except clarity. She had done everything. She had said everything she had to say, and now, with her face on the screen, her silence spoke more than 1,000 words. The look on her face was a silent sentence for all those who thought she was weak, who thought she could be thrown out like a useless object. Now everyone who saw that photo knew she was neither weak nor helpless. She was a winner. A winner not because she outshone them, but because she forced the system to admit its mistake. They thought she was thrown out, but in fact, it was her return. Local newspapers, which usually ignored such stories, could not ignore them now. Discussions filled forums, social networks, streets. People began to share this shot because there was more to this photo than just a business situation. It was about justice. It was about the truth, which always finds a way in the end. And many remembered those who were once squeezed out, humiliated, silenced. Many saw in her face not just a woman, but a symbol. The second day after the photo was published, the cashier did not show up for work. Officially, she was fired for not meeting the company's internal standards and ethical standards. But everyone knew that this was not just a firing. This was the result of the fact that her cruelty and disrespect for people, her racism, her attempt to hide her hatred under the guise of rules led to a catastrophe that no one could hide. There was remorse in the eyes of the management, but it was hidden, almost imperceptible. They did not feel sorry for her. They felt sorry for themselves. They were sorry that they were now standing before the entire public, before thousands of people who could no longer turn a blind eye to what was happening in their stores. They were sorry that they had not recognized Aaliyah as a partner from the very beginning. They were sorry that they had not realized that behind every person they humiliated, there could be not only force, but also power. But for Aaliyah, it didn't matter. She had already done her job. Her goal wasn't revenge. She didn't want to ruin anyone's life. She just wanted them to understand that behind every person is their dignity, their strength, their right to be heard. And the lesson she taught was so powerful that no one could forget it. The next day, when the news started to discuss everything that had happened again, the director of the chain came to work. He stood at the entrance to the store, his face tense. He did not know what to do next, how to justify his position, how to regain people's trust. And only when he looked at the empty cash registers, when he heard the salespeople discussing what had happened, did he understand. Everything they were losing was not a business. It was something more. It was something that money could not buy. He didn't know when this moment had happened, when they became the ones who could no longer hide the truth. But one thing was clear. Everything that had happened was now much more than just the cashier being fired. It was an admission of error. An admission that their system and their treatment of people were broken. And now, even if they wanted to, they couldn't fix it. But Aaliyah, standing in front of the display case with an empty look, knew that this was not the end. She was not done yet. She knew that she would not stop there. And her quiet victory was only the beginning. What do you think about this story? Have you ever experienced racism or injustice in your life? It is very important for us to know your opinion and experiences. Each of you is incredibly important to us, and we sincerely appreciate your support. Subscribe to the channel if you like the story, and do not forget that your comments are what helps us move forward. Write the phrase, "I'm listening to the end," so that we know that you are with us until the very end. Have a nice day.